So, back in 2007, the executives running the biggest digital camera companies in the world, they really thought they were in this, like, fierce, high-stakes war with each other.
Oh, absolutely. They were totally obsessing over things like megapixels and, zooming
Right,
capabilities.
just fighting tooth and nail to steal these tiny, tiny fractions of market share from rival camera makers. And then, meanwhile, a tech company launches a mobile phone with a tiny, objectively inferior lens just slapped on the back of it.
Which the camera executives completely dismissed. I mean, to them, a phone wasn't a camera.
Exactly, wasn't in their industry. But then, just a few years later, the standalone digital camera market was practically wiped off the map.
Because they misunderstood the water they were swimming in. They thought their industry was making cameras, right?
Yeah.
When in reality, the consumer's actual need was capturing and sharing memories.
Yeah.
So the moment a different technology fulfilled that need more efficiently, the entire profit pool just vanished from the camera ecosystem and rematerialized over in the smartphone ecosystem.
Which is honestly the perfect entry point for what we're doing today. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive into the underlying mechanics of industry analysis. Our mission today is to break down how expert analysts dissect entire sectors of the economy before they even, consider looking at a single company's balance sheet.
Right, because if you want to see past all the flashy corporate PR, you have to understand the ecosystem first. I mean, if you want to know why certain businesses are just bulletproof while others are doomed from day one,
Yeah.
you master the industry level.
Because an economy isn't just one massive, uniform ocean, right?
Yeah.
For you listening, if you want that edge in a meeting or a conversation, you have to see that the economy is made up of these incredibly complex, specific currents. The predators, the prey, the rules of survival, they all change dramatically depending on where you draw the boundaries.
Yeah, and let's actually start right there with the boundaries, because the logical first step in analyzing any ecosystem is, well, defining what the industry actually is.
Which sounds like administrative paperwork, honestly.
It does. It really does. But defining the industry, which analysts call the boundary problem, it completely alters the competitive landscape. I mean, rigid traditional definitions will totally blind you to actual market behavior.
Because standardized classification systems kind of fail here.
Oh, massively. Take the National Industry Classification, or the NIC. Under that system, a high-end luxury car manufacturer and a company producing entry-level compact hatchbacks might be lumped into the exact same broad category of passenger cars.
Which makes zero sense from an analytical standpoint.
Right.
Like, a person shopping for a $250,000 supercar is definitely not cross-shopping a budget hatchback. Those two companies are not competing for the same capital.
Exactly. So that's why frameworks like the Global Industry Classification Standard, or GICS, offer a much more tiered, nuanced approach. They break things down into sectors, industry groups, industries, and sub-industries.
Okay, it's better.
It is better, but even then, the analyst has to use some really aggressive critical thinking to map the real battlefield.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the example from the Source Text PVR Cinemas, the major movie theater chain. If you draw a really tight boundary and define them simply as cinema exhibitors, well, then you're only measuring their performance against other movie theaters.
Right. You look at their market share against rival theater chains and you might think, wow, they are completely dominating.
But if you zoom out, if you define the boundary as out-of-home entertainment or just entertainment media, the threat matrix just totally explodes.
It shifts overnight. Suddenly you're competing with streaming platforms like Netflix, capturing that Friday night audience, or, live sporting events, absorbing people's disposable income.
If you draw the boundary wrong, you
Oh.
calculate the wrong risks.
Precisely.
It totally reminds me of that classic internet debate, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, right.
Because if you define it as a sandwich, then it's competing with a BLT at a deli. But if you define it as its own distinct category, it's competing with a hamburger at a barbecue. Like, the definition literally dictates the opponent.
That is a perfect analogy. The definition dictates the opponent, it dictates the pricing power, and it dictates the growth ceiling. So, okay, once you successfully define those boundaries, the immediate next requirement is analyzing how that specific terrain behaves under macroeconomic pressure.
Right, because every business goes through economic cycles, but they don't all react the same way.
No, the margin dynamics react in fundamentally different ways. We usually look at this through the lens of cyclicality. So first, you have defensive industries. Think healthcare or fast-moving consumer goods.
Which people always say is because, well, people always need medicine and food.
Right, but mechanically, it's about demand inelasticity combined with pricing power. During a recession, a defensive industry maintains its revenue baseline because you just can't defer that consumption.
Makes sense.
Then you step up to semi-cyclical industries. Think consumer durables like washing machines or televisions. There's a baseline of replacement demand. If your fridge breaks, you need a new one. But consumers can delay upgrading, so you do see noticeable revenue dips during a downturn.
But the real volatility, like the crazy swings, that happens in deep cyclical industries, right?
Oh, absolutely. Capital goods, steel manufacturing, heavy machinery. The mechanics of deep cyclicals are fascinating because of something like operating leverage.
The massive fixed costs.
Yes, factories, blast furnaces, huge equipment. When a recession hits, corporate expansion just freezes instantly. Demand for steel doesn't just dip a little bit, it craters. And because their fixed costs remain incredibly high, a small drop in revenue completely wipes out their profit margins.
Wow.
But, and this is the flip side, at the very first sign of an economic recovery, all that pent-up demand floods back. Once those massive fixed costs are covered, almost every additional dollar of revenue flows straight to the bottom line. It causes a massive boom.
So knowing whether you're looking at a defensive baseline or a deep cyclical wave is completely crucial for timing. But cycles are, temporary. They revert to a mean eventually. What I find so much more dangerous is a permanent shift, which brings us to value migration.
Right. Value migration is when long-term secular trends cause the actual wealth within a market to permanently relocate. If cyclicality is the tide coming in and out, value migration is the ocean physically changing course.
Okay, let me push back on how we use that term, though.
Yeah.
Because often when analysts talk about value migration, it honestly just feels like a polite Wall Street euphemism for a legacy company getting lazy, failing to innovate, and then just going bankrupt.
Well, I mean, laziness accelerates the decline, sure, but value migration is a structural phenomenon. It's about capital efficiency. When a dominant company falls to a secular trend, the consumer's money didn't just evaporate from the world.
Right.
The utility the consumer was paying for just found a more efficient vehicle. And this can happen geographically. Look at the commercialization of horizontal drilling and U.S. shale gas extraction.
Oh, yeah, that totally altered the cost structure of energy.
Exactly. The value physically migrated from traditional oil-producing nations over to the U.S. because that new ecosystem was just structurally cheaper.
So that's a geographic shift. And the camera example we started the show with, that would be a cross-industry shift, right?
Yeah.
The desire to capture memories, that consumer capital, it migrated from the chemical film ecosystem into the digital sensor ecosystem. It bypassed Kodak entirely.
And it happens fiercely within the exact same industry, too. Think about BlackBerry.
Oh man, BlackBerry.
They didn't go bankrupt because people stopped sending corporate emails. They had a near monopoly on secure mobile communication. But when 2G-enabled smartphones came out and introduced the superior software-driven ecosystem, the value migrated directly from BlackBerry's hardware-centric profit pool into Apple's ecosystem.
So the wealth just moves to wherever the friction is lowest. Okay, so assuming we have defined the correct boundaries and we've verified that the value isn't, actively migrating away from our ecosystem, we still have to figure out who actually gets to capture the profits. Because a growing industry doesn't automatically mean it's a profitable one for the companies inside it.
Right. Which brings us to the structural architecture of profitability. Michael Porter's 5 forces. He formulated this framework back in 1979, and it strips away all the marketing fluff and just looks at the brutal mechanics of the battlefield.
And he breaks the forces down into horizontal pressures, like rivalry, and the threat of new entrants in vertical pressures, which are the bargaining power of buyers and suppliers.
Yeah.
Let's look at the horizontal forces first. Rivalry and entry barriers. Because there are certain industries that are just notorious for destroying capital, right?
Yeah.
Like telecommunications or aviation.
Aviation is the textbook example of a structurally unattractive industry. I mean, the entry barriers are incredibly high. Leasing planes, securing routes, it costs billions. But once you are finally in the arena, the product is largely commoditized.
Yeah, a seat on a flight from New York to London is basically the same across carriers.
Exactly. And that leads to cutthroat rivalry and brutal price wars just to maintain market share, which chronically depresses profit margins across the entire board.
Contrast that capital destruction with the moats you see, like education or fast-moving consumer goods.
Totally different world. Establishing a reputable university or a globally recognized brand like Coca-Cola creates this massive intangible entry barrier. You don't see top-tier universities engaging in daily price wars just to fill seats. They enjoy structural protection, which allows for really high margins.
Right. And then you have the vertical forces, which really determine who gets squeezed. The dynamic between supplier power and buyer power basically dictates where the margin accumulates. Think about the difference between a hospital and a street vendor.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Because if you need emergency surgery, the hospital dictates the fee. You don't negotiate. The buyer has zero leverage there.
The hospital possesses absolute supplier power in that transaction.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you look at an unbranded street vendor selling vegetables, the switching costs are zero. You can just walk to the next cart. So the buyer holds all the leverage and dictates the pricing ceiling.
It's like being the only person selling water at the finish line of a marathon. You don't have to negotiate at all. You just dictate the price. And the ultimate global manifestation of supplier power would be OPEC.
Definitely. They control the spigot for the raw material that powers the whole global economy. They don't have to launch fancy marketing campaigns. They literally just physically adjust their output to engineer whatever price point they want. That is structural domination.
Amazing.
And it highlights a really vital reality for investors and executives. The industry structure often matters way more than the actual talent of the management team. Warren Buffett summarized this perfectly in the source material. He said, "When a management with a reputation for brilliance tackles a business with a reputation for bad economics, it is the reputation of the business that remains intact."
Yeah, you just can't outmanage terrible industry physics.
You really can't. His other famous quote on this is equally piercing. He said, "Should you find yourself in a chronically leaking boat, energy devoted to changing vessels is likely to be more productive than energy devoted to patching leaks."
Meaning, if Porter's forces are overwhelmingly stacked against you, your capital allocation should be focused on exiting the industry entirely, not trying to win a losing game.
Right.
But okay, let's assume you are in a viable industry. You know the boundaries, you understand the power dynamics. How do you actually deploy your specific products to maximize cash flow?
Well, before deploying products, a quick scan of external macro threats is practically mandatory. And this is where pestle analysis comes in.
Pestle, right. Tracking political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. I feel like a lot of people treat pestle as just this academic checklist, but a single regulatory shift can instantly destroy an industry's margin structure.
Oh, in a heartbeat. Look at the Indian telecom sector, the Vodafone retrospective tax case, or the sudden judicial cancellation of over 100 telecom licenses that completely rewrote the rules of survival overnight. You can have brilliant products, you can have high market share, but a stroke of a legal pen can wipe out your capital.
Yeah, but once you survive that macro environment, managing the actual products is where the Boston Consulting Group matrix, the BCG matrix, becomes this incredibly powerful tool because it classifies a company's business units based on two specific metrics: market growth rate and relative market share.
Exactly. And this matrix is fundamentally about the life cycle of cash. It creates 4 distinct quadrants. First, you have the stars.
Okay.
These are products operating in a high-growth market where you actually hold a dominant market share.
The source cites Sanitary Ware as a classic star.
Right.
High market share in a rapidly expanding housing market. But here's the mechanical reality of STAR that I think surprises people. It generates a lot of revenue, but it consumes almost all of it.
Yes. To maintain that high growth, you have to constantly build new factories, hire more sales teams, expand distribution. Stars bleed cash. They require massive reinvestment just to defend their position against rivals who are trying to capture that exact same growth.
So the goal isn't just to stay a star forever.
No, the ultimate goal of a star is that eventually the market growth slows down, but you manage to retain your dominant market share. When that happens, your capital expenditure drops to near zero, and the star transitions into the second quadrant. It becomes a cash cow.
Cash cows. Low market growth, so you don't need to build new factories, but you still hold a high market share. So the revenue is massive. The gross margin flows almost entirely to free cash flow.
Right. Navneet Publications, which produces syllabus-based textbooks, is a prime example of this. The market grows slowly, and it's very predictable. They have an entrenched, massive distribution network. The R&D requirement is practically zero. I mean, they basically just tweak the content when a curriculum changes.
Yeah, the capital expenditure is incredibly low.
So it operates as a pure cash engine. Colgate toothpaste is another classic cash cow.
Okay, let me challenge the long-term viability of that, though. Because if an executive team has a massive cash cow, it just seems like a huge recipe for corporate complacency. Like, if Navneet publications is just milking the same distribution network year after year with minimal innovation. Aren't they just sitting ducks for a digital disruptor?
Oh, they absolutely are, if they view the cash cow as an endpoint. But a cash cow is not a permanent strategy, it is a funding mechanism. Secular trends will eventually kill every cash cow. So the strategic imperative of the BCG matrix is that you must harvest the profits from the cash cow and funnel that capital directly into the third quadrant, the question marks.
Question marks. These are the gambles, right? High market growth, but you currently have low market share.
Exactly. They are the products trying to disrupt the future. They consume immense amounts of cash just to fight for market share, and they generate very little return in the short term. The capital from the cash cow is what gives them the runway to fight, and, they can go either way.
Like Tata Motors. They poured massive capital into the Nano, which was a question mark that ultimately failed to gain traction and died.
Right. But then look at Bajaj Auto. They poured capital into the Pulsar, which was a question mark that captured the market, shifted into a star, and eventually became a cash cow of its own.
It's just the complete cycle of capital. And then, of course, there's the fourth quadrant, the graveyard, the dogs. Slow market growth, low market share. They barely generate enough cash to maintain themselves, and they tie up valuable corporate resources.
Dogs are just a capital trap. The analytical move there isn't to try and fix them, it's to divest or liquidate them, freeing up capital to fund more question marks.
Makes total sense. So we have the framework. We map the boundaries, track the value migration, assess structural power with Porter's forces, and manage capital allocation with the BCG matrix. The final step of industry analysis is keeping score.
Yeah.
How do we measure execution?
Well, you cannot rely on a generic income statement. Execution has to be measured by the specific operational physics of the industry using key performance indicators, or KPIs. A KPI is entirely dependent on what the industry considers its core unit of pricing and its primary constraining factors.
Right, because you track the wrong metric, you are literally flying blind. Let's look at the mechanics of different sectors. In aviation, the unit of pricing is moving volume over distance.
Therefore, the defining KPIs are passenger or cargo kilometers and occupancy rates, which is often called load factor. An airline's constraining factor is the physical seats on the plane. If a plane takes off with an empty seat, that revenue opportunity is permanently destroyed.
It's gone forever.
Gone. So you obsessively track how full the planes are and how far they fly.
Contrast that operational leverage with, like, a commercial bank. A bank doesn't care about occupancy rates in its lobby. A bank's fundamental product is money itself.
Exactly. For a bank, the constraining factor is the cost of capital. So you track the net interest margin, which is the spread between the interest paid to depositors and the interest charged to borrowers. And you track non-performing assets, or NPAs, to measure the toxicity of the loan book.
And crucially, the CARES ratio, the proportion of current and savings account deposits. Why is CANSA so critical? Because current accounts usually pay zero interest, and savings accounts pay very little.
Right.
So if a bank has a high CANSA ratio, it is sitting on a mountain of virtually free money. They take that free money, lend it out at 8 or 10%, and capture a massive spread.
Now look at telecommunications. The physical data isn't the unit of pricing, the subscriber is. So telecom analysts fixate on ARPU, average revenue per user. Are you successfully upselling customers to higher margin data plans? You also monitor the churn rate, which measures the velocity at which subscribers are fleeing to a rival network.
And finally, retail. Retail is unique because a supermarket sells thousands of different SKUs. The literal unit of pricing is irrelevant. You don't model the margin on a single bottle of shampoo versus a loaf of bread.
No. In retail, the constraining factor is physical floor space. So the definitive KPI is same-store sales growth.
Which isolates organic growth. Because if a retailer opens 50 new stores, their total revenue will obviously jump, but they might be funding that with massive debt. Same-store sales growth tells you if the original locations, the ones open for more than a year, are actually attracting more foot traffic and driving larger basket sizes.
Right. You wouldn't judge a basketball player by their batting average. If you evaluate a bank by analyzing its same-store sales, or a retail chain by looking at its ARPU, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the rules of the game. Industry-specific KPIs align your analysis with reality.
Wow. Okay, so bringing this all together for you listening, industry analysis basically gives you X-ray vision into the corporate world. It's not just about looking at a company's profits today. It's about drawing accurate boundaries to identify the true predators. It's watching the horizon to see if the underlying value of the ecosystem is physically migrating to a new technology.
Absolutely.
It's analyzing Porter's forces to see if the company has structural power or if they are trapped in a leaky boat. It's mapping out the flow of capital from cash cows to question marks and tracking the execution through the precise KPIs that govern that specific terrain.
The water dictates the fate of the fish. So the next time a company announces a brilliant new strategy or, an aggressive new CEO, your first question shouldn't be about the leader. Your first question should be, what are the structural economics of the industry they are trying to conquer?
I love that. And I want to leave you with something highly practical to consider today. Apply the BCG matrix to your own career or your specific department at work. Are you operating as a star, requiring constant energy but capturing massive growth? Have you settled into a cash cow role, comfortable but highly vulnerable to disruption? Or are you pouring your most valuable asset, your time, into a dog?
Hmm.
And most critically, look at the ecosystem of your chosen profession. Is the value migrating away from your current skill set right now?
That is probably the most important strategic audit a professional can perform.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Remember, the economy isn't a monolith. Ignore the surface waves, map the currents, identify the true predators, and master the